Hi guys, in this video we're going to be looking at a mock test from Warwick Test Centre. As we start the test, we're starting in the car park just outside the test centre gates because you shouldn't be going into the test centre unless you're actually sitting your test. Now we're starting off with a driver fault for vehicle checks. This relates to the tell me questions. Now the tell me question you'll be asked at the start of your driving test before you drive the car. You'll only be asked one question, and if you get it wrong, it is only a driver fault. So don't stress if you get it wrong, but of course, if you can get that question right, it puts you off in a more positive start. So do have a look for the playlist on my channel for Show Me and Tell Me questions. As we leave the test centre, turning right, just make sure that you're aware this is a 40-mile-an-hour road, so you want to be picking up your speed, aiming for that 40 mile an hour if it's safe to do so. Just a little way ahead, it does change to 30. Now what the examiners want to see is you lowering your speed to 30 before you reach that sign. You don't want to be passing the sign at 40 and then slowing down. Slow down, hit 30 before you get to that sign. People did a really nice job there, getting that speed down smoothly. Coming up the hill, you'll see a road on the right. Just be mindful of cars coming in and out of that road, particularly if it's large vehicles as well, like buses or lorries. If they're trying to come out, they may need to swing out onto your side of the road to turn left, so watch out for those vehicles too. As we come over the hill, it's really easy to pick up the speed coming down the other side, so you want to be mindful of that, just covering the brake. You can see the pupil here creeping up a little bit, hitting 31. Because it's an insignificant amount over the speed limit and the pupil fixes it straight away, I'm not going to record a fault for that. We're going to be taking this next road on the right. Whenever you're approaching a turn like this, it's very easy to become focused on the traffic coming the other way and to forget to look into that road. And roads like this, they're very narrow. As you can see, there's parked cars on either side. Now, if there's something coming up this road, you'll want to wait and let them pull out before you turn in. That's going to give you more room to maneuver to get yourself in safely. So you've got to make sure you're looking into these roads before you make the turn. At the end of the road, we're taking a left turn. It's quite hard to see what's coming from the right. See how slow the pupil comes up before he pauses in order to give way to the cars from the right. You'll need to make sure that you can see effectively before you pull out these junctions. If you come up to that giveaway line and the examiner doesn't think you've made effective observations, they're going to record faults. So take your time and just double check that nothing's come in before you cross that giveaway line. At the end of this road, we'll be taking a right turn, and the same applies here. You'll want to come up to that giveaway, giving yourself enough time to stop if there's anything coming, and that means just slowing down, making sure you look both ways effectively. I've said this a few times in other videos, but I think it's worth a mention just to remind people that not making effective observations at junctions is the most common reason for failing the driving test, and that's been true for a number of years now. So make sure you're slowing down, giving yourself plenty of time to look around before you cross those giveaways. Coming around the bend here, just be mindful of cars and vehicles coming the other way. We've just seen a bus go the other way, for example. With the parked cars on the right-hand side, there may not be enough room to pass, so just lower your speed as you're coming around there. Anytime that your sight or your space is restricted, come off the power, check your mirrors, and make sure you're safe. We're going to be pulling up on the left here, and the examiners will ask you to do this several times on your driving test. The aim is just to see that you can find a safe place. You check your mirrors and signal. Of course, you give plenty of time for other traffic to respond to what you're doing. If there's cars behind you, for example, you don't want to just go mirror signal stop. You'll need to check your mirrors, signal, and then gradually slow down, allowing that car behind time to react. When the examiner asks you to drive on, check your mirrors, check your blind spot, and make sure you're signaling as well. This pupil did forget his blind spot check. However, there was nothing around, so it's going to be a driver fault on that occasion. But if you're not checking your blind spot and there is something there, that can very quickly escalate into a serious or dangerous fault. Be very, very careful to check those blind spots. And what the examiners are looking for when you do this is a full turn your head around to the right and lean forward out your seat so you can see over your right shoulder out of the driver's window. At the end of this road, we're going to be taking a right turn. It's a good view here again, but it can be quite busy sometimes, so again, just make sure you're looking around effectively, looking for cars coming off the roundabout to the right hand side, and looking for cars coming from the left because they do come down this estate quite quickly sometimes too. We've then got a roundabout up ahead where we'll be turning right third exit. You can see the pupil lining up on the right hand side. That's absolutely spot on. If you go in left or straight, use the left hand side, and then make sure you stick that position as you enter the roundabout. So if you're in the right hand lane, you're keeping close to the roundabout until you leave, just like this pupil. Make sure you cover your mirrors and signal before you leave, and then gently bring the car over to that left hand side as you're leaving. If you can't move over because someone's coming round on the left hand side, just keep your right signal on and go around again. The examiners will have no problem with you doing that. As long as what you're doing is safe, then the examiners are happy and you won't pick up any faults. As we come over the brow of the hill here, you'll see the Mini turning right. Be very mindful of this junction because it can get quite tight and vehicles don't always move fully into that filter lane. Notice this learner has the left wheels hanging over the line still. Now, the pupil slowed down, checked his mirrors, made sure he's safe, so I'm not going to record a fault there. Now, if you are turning right at junctions like this, you want to make sure all four wheels are in that filter lane and that you're keeping that left lane clear so cars can get past more easily. That learner would pick up a fault for the positioning there, potentially a serious fault because we had to react to their mistake. Most common cause for that is worrying about the oncoming traffic and worrying that you're going to get in their way. As long as you're going over to your line and not crossing into their path, you're absolutely fine. So get all the way into those filter lanes if that's where you're going. As we come down towards Warwick town, we are joining a queue of traffic. Of course, the lights at the end of this road do get quite busy and you'll often have queues of traffic here. So it'll just be a case of keeping a nice following distance like this learner is here, watching your left side to make sure you're giving space to the parked cars as well, and looking out for cyclists that might be coming up because they're potentially going to try and squeeze between you and the parked cars. Be mindful of your right hand side as well, that you're not getting too close to that centre line, particularly if you've got big vehicles coming the other way. And again, it just comes down to demonstrating to the examiner that you're aware of your surroundings by repeatedly looking around, checking your mirrors, but also looking ahead. Now, by looking ahead, one of the things to watch out for is that you're not fixating on the car that's immediately in front. Now, that's really easily done, especially when you're watching a video like this. But if you look at the cars that are ahead of it, the traffic lights that are ahead of it, you can plan for what this car is going to do rather than just reacting to what it does. Now, as we queue up at the lights, you'll need to watch out for markings like this keep clear box. You can see the opening on the left for the Castle Limes Hotel. You do not want to obstruct them if you can avoid it. As the lights change, we're going to be turning right, and you'll see there is a right filter arrow on the traffic lights, meaning we can just turn straight across, and there's no worry of having to give way to oncoming traffic. However, you should still look around because people don't always do what they should when the lights are in your favour. So just scanning around to look out for things like e-bikes, pedestrians, cyclists, or blue light vehicles, for example. That's going to keep you safe as you go through the traffic lights. Now, I can't stress this point enough, but a green light does not mean go. It means go if safe. So you are responsible still to make sure that the junction is safe when you cross it. Up ahead, we're going to be turning left at the roundabout. You can see the arrows here clearly marking which lane you should be in for each direction, left or right. As you're approaching these lanes, it's important to make sure you're checking your mirrors and signalling before you take up position. And this way, people know which position you're going to take up, so they can plan for that rather than taking up position and then signalling, because doing it that way around, the signal becomes pointless. You've already done what you're doing before you've told them what you're doing, and the whole point of a signal is to tell someone before you do it. As we approach the roundabout, of course, you'll still be looking around to the left-hand side at the road you're going into, while glancing up at the right for gaps in the traffic. Now, this is something that people often get too muddled up with. They spend too much time focusing on the traffic from the right and forget to look where they're going. And as you'll notice here, there's a red light, there's a change in speed, and there's cars stopping to queue up for the lights. Now, if you miss any of that information, that could cause you problems. And this is why it's so important to always look where you're going more than anything else. So every time you're turning left in particular, and at roundabouts especially, look up to the road you're going into and glance around for the opportunities to go. That way you can plan better for what you're going into and keep things more controlled, more safe. And of course, if you do that, you're going to give yourself a much better chance of passing your test. Coming up to the bridge, you'll notice there's a sign on the left for a roundabout. As we come over, we're coming up to the roundabout, we're going to go straight ahead, second exit. And if you look at the arrows, you can see that we need to use the right-hand lane. Those who are sharp-eyed as well might also notice the coach is indicating to turn right. So you'll want to look out for things like this nice and early to avoid close calls. Now, I think the pupil did a really nice job of that. He was on the mirrors. Now, that's especially true with that left-hand mirror because you've got a gap there where someone could potentially enter the roundabout with you. You want to be very aware of any situation where there's a lane alongside you, because that means somebody alongside you can try to come with you, even if they're not supposed to. So mirror use and just being prepared for problems like that, it's going to help you keep safe. Again, this is what's going to get you through your test, that constant awareness of what's going on around you. As soon as you miss something and it catches you off guard, that's when your driving becomes reactive. That's when your nerves are going to start to escalate. And this is what you don't want to be doing on your driving test. Looking ahead, you'll notice the speed limit changes to 40 miles an hour. So you want to be picking up that speed if it's safe to do so, but being mindful of the traffic lights up ahead. See that they're on red at the moment. So the pupil's starting to come off the power and bring that speed back down nice and early. Now, by doing this, he allows that other car to pull away as the lights change, meaning he doesn't have to stop. Now, this just reduces the amount of work he has to do as he comes up to those traffic lights. As we cross the lights, you'll notice the lanes merge. Now, it's really important to cover your mirrors when you see those arrows telling you the lanes are merging, because this is a position where people will try and get around you sometimes. Now, if you don't spot them early and you continue to accelerate as they're trying to overtake you, that just increases the risk in that situation and makes it more and more difficult for you to get through safely. So again, this comes down to the point I said earlier about that constant awareness. You're looking out for potential risks to eliminate them before they become actual risks. And that is what's going to serve you best, not only on your driving test, but after you pass your test as well. For those who are keen-eyed on this section of road, you'll notice we have passed a 50 mile an hour sign, so we can pick up the speed a little bit more. But it's up to you to balance that with keeping it safe as well. Coming into this bend, you might notice the pupil leans a little bit too far to the right, and I'm going to record a steering fault here. Now, sometimes this can be caused by carrying too much speed into a bend. In this situation, it was the pupil looking in his mirror for a little bit too long. So whilst I do say you've got to look at your mirrors frequently, you don't want to stare at your mirrors and get distracted by them. Approaching this right turn, the junction was a lot closer than people expected, so his speed into it was a little bit too fast, and that meant he was still braking as he entered the turn. Because it was only a little bit too fast and he corrected it quite nicely without causing any extra risks to anyone around him, I'm only going to record a driver fault. Now, situations like this are one of the things that I found most people get caught out by on the driving test. And it's typically because they're so worried about being marked for that fault that it distracts them from what they're doing next. And that's when the serious or dangerous faults come in, because the pupil's distracted by what they've done, thinking that that's what they're going to fail for. However, it's just a driver fault. So it's really important that if you make a mistake on your driving test, don't let it get in your head. You've just got to drop it, leave it behind you, and focus back on what's going on next. Otherwise, you're going to let it escalate very quickly because you're not focused on what you're doing. When you're traveling down country lanes like this, using your mirrors is really important. It's going to keep you aware of how much room you've got on the left-hand side. So if anything does come the other way, you know exactly how much space you've got to use to get past that vehicle. In the event that something does come the other way, check that left mirror again and slow down as well. If you're not sure about the space, then bring your speed down and let the other vehicle deal with that situation. By slowing down, you give not just you more time to react, but you also give them more time to react to how you're positioned. This is going to help both of you keep safe. The mirror use as well is going to keep you aware of how much room you've got around you and help you negotiate that space a lot more safely. Anytime you're traveling down roads like this, it is important to watch out as well for signs that might be hidden away behind the trees. Just up ahead, for example, we've got a 30-mile-an-hour sign. Once the summer hits and these trees start to grow more, they become very difficult to see. So you've got to keep yourself aware of signposts or markings to look out for things like this. Now, from past experience where I've sat in on driving tests, I have found that the examiners are very helpful if the situation is unfairly laid up against you. So if the signs are really well hidden and there's no obvious clues to what the speed limit is, the examiners will tell you there's a speed limit there. And it's just because it's an unfair situation. But what they won't do is tell you if it's reasonable that you should be able to see it. Coming down into Barford now, and you might have noticed there's a few signs here telling you that we've got to give way to the oncoming cars. You see the people does a nice job there tucking in at the give way line to allow this Mercedes through. Just be mindful on situations like this that cars coming the other way may try to let you go. It's up to you whether you take that opportunity or not, but if you do take that opportunity, then you have to be pretty confident that they are definitely giving way to you. Pulling up on the left here, and the pupil is going to now do an angle start. You will definitely be asked to do one of these on your driving test. The examiner will specifically ask you to pull up behind a parked car. The same principles apply as pulling up normally. You're just doing it behind a parked car, so make sure you leave enough room to get out. Anytime you're moving away, make sure you're checking over that right shoulder, covering that blind spot before you move out. In this situation, my advice is to check around, and then when you start moving out, check it again. But also be aware of the oncoming cars, because you're going to be moving out into the middle of the road at best. And if there's oncoming traffic, you don't want to pull out into their path. As we come around the bend, we've got parked cars on the right. So a situation like this, you want to keep your speed down and be watching out for oncoming vehicles. Any situation where there's less space to maneuver, then you'll want to carry a lowered speed. And this means you can stop more easily if the gaps become too tight or if there's too much going on. If you're really not sure, just pull in and wait for the other traffic to pass by. Now, in this situation, the van does have priority over us. And ideally, the pupil should be prepared to give way to the van. However, I agree with the pupil here. There was plenty of room for both of us to fit. The problem comes in where the van driver is too busy looking down at his feet for some reason. I'll let you speculate as to why. And doesn't actually steer into the bend properly. So as a result, they start coming out towards the centre of the road. So I don't think my pupil actually did anything wrong here that was worthy of recording as any driving faults. At the mini roundabout, we're turning left. Now the building on the right creates quite a visual barrier, so you need to slow down and make sure you can see what's coming from the right before you enter that roundabout. Equally, the road on the left is typically filled with parked cars, and if you're not looking up to the left to make sure you've got a clear path ahead of you, you're going to run into problems. Now, the curve of this road and the amount of parked cars don't help with that situation, but as long as what you do is reasonable for the situation, then the examiners will see that and they will not record faults against you unfairly. Pulling up on the left again, remember you'll do this several times on your driving test. You'll want to be mindful of things that aren't always apparent at first sight, such as where that man is stood up ahead on the left with the post. That is a bus stop, and if you pull up in a bus stop, you are going to pick a driver fault. If you pull up in a bus stop and a bus wants to get in there, you're going to pick up a serious fault for obstructing that bus. So the trick for pulling over is to look ahead, pick a reasonable place to pull over, and as you bring yourself into that position, just keep double checking that it's the right spot to be in. If you realize something's not right and you don't want to be there, then just mention that to the examiner, check your blind spot, and move on. I'm going to carry out the maneuver at this point here, and I've asked the pupil to carry out a parallel park. Now, the main thing the examiners are after when you're doing your maneuvers is plenty of observation, looking over your left shoulder and your right shoulder repeatedly. Really take your time when you're reversing and make sure that when you finish the manoeuvre, the car is in a reasonable position. If you're not happy with where the car's positioned, don't be afraid to correct it. Once you've finished your manoeuvre and you're asked to drive on, as with the angle start, the examiners want to see you looking around over that right blind spot and just being mindful of oncoming vehicles as well. Take your time when you're doing this, make sure you're safe, and remember to signal if there's anyone nearby as well. Even this guy with the lawnmower, he wants to know you're pulling out because he might decide to walk across the road and mow the pavement on the other side. You just don't know. So make sure that you're very clear with your signals, that everybody around you knows exactly what your intentions are. Up ahead, you might be able to see the signs telling us that there is a sharp bend and then a give way. And at the end of the road, we're going to be turning right. Whenever you're approaching a situation like this, you'll need to reduce your speed and just be mindful of vehicles coming around that bend, particularly large vehicles that will need to swing out onto your side of the road in order to make it around that bend safely. If you come up to bends like this too quickly, of course, you're going to struggle to negotiate with vehicles coming the other way, particularly those large vehicles, and you're going to struggle to line up and respond to that junction safely as you come up to the end. You'll notice how it's split into two lanes and how we need to position on that right-hand side. As we make the turn as well, you might have spotted the 50-mile-an-hour sign, which means the cars coming across us here are moving pretty quickly. So you'll need to be very careful about the gap that you choose. It can be quite difficult to get out onto roads like this, especially when you're turning right. So you'll also need to keep in mind that if you're sat there for a short while, it can be very easy to feel pressured by the fact that you haven't moved for a while and start worrying about, I haven't gone, the examiner's going to mark me for hesitation. Don't let that pressure get the better of you. If you haven't found a safe gap, then you haven't found a safe gap. Wait your time until you're certain that you can get across safely. When you do pull out, make sure you're picking up your speed nice and quickly as well. Remember, the cars coming up behind you are going to be traveling at 50 miles an hour if they're behaving themselves. You'll want to pick up your speed quite confidently here in order to reduce the risk of them catching up and immediately starting to look for the overtake because this bloody learner's going so slow. You can see here the pupil's already doing over 40 miles an hour, and that's really, really good for a road like this. Remember, the speed has to match the circumstances too. So whilst it's a 50 mile an hour limit, there may be situations where 50 mile an hour just isn't appropriate, and it's absolutely fine to reduce your speed in those situations. The examiners are not going to mark you for not doing 50 mile an hour when it's not safe to do it. Anytime you're approaching junctions like this as well, just keep an eye out for vehicles trying to join the road. As I mentioned earlier, there is that pressure that you can feel if you've been waiting a while, that you feel like you've got to get out into a gap, and sometimes people will succumb to that pressure and just pull out when it's not really appropriate. If you're keeping an eye out for them, then you're ready for that to happen, and that gives you a better chance of reacting smoothly and calmly rather than them pulling out and you reacting to them and that heightening your nerves and causing that sort of panicked and stressed feeling inside you. That's not going to do you well on your driving test. So you need to make sure you're looking around for these potential problems in order to keep that sense of calm. Up ahead, you'll notice there is a huge diagram for Longbridge Island. Now, Longbridge Island catches a lot of people out because it is quite a complicated roundabout. And we're going to be going straight ahead towards the A46, Coventry. Even though the markings are quite faded, you can see that Coventry is the second lane as we approach. This then splits into lanes 2 and 3, and you can see lane 3 also works for Coventry. Now, in situations like this, the ideal position to be in is the leftmost position that goes where you want to go. So the pupil's done a really nice job choosing this position. As we look into the junction, you can see those short white lines guiding us into the correct lane. You'll also see the big green signs on the far side of the roundabout, and they're going to confirm what lane we should be in as we make our way across. Now keep in mind there's two positions going to Coventry and we're in the left of those two positions. So that's what we'll be looking for on those signs and on the markings as we make our way around. It can be really easy to become distracted by the amount of noise, the amount of markings and signs around here. So the trick here is to focus on where you want to be and then let everything else work around you. Adding plenty of mirror use into this as well is going to keep you aware of who's around you. And that means, of course, you can pick out those potential risks, such as vehicles that may be in the wrong lane and are trying to move around nearby. Now, as I said earlier, if you're looking out for these problems and you're predicting them, this is going to help you plan for those problems becoming a reality. And it's going to help you keep calm in those situations too. Whereas if you're not ready for them and you're reacting to changes as they happen, you're going to feel more stressed, more pressured, and you're more likely to make mistakes because you're not focused on what you're doing. You're too busy reacting to the immediate situations around you. As we leave the roundabout, you'll notice the pupil's position sways a little bit. She actually brushes those white lines on the left-hand side. And as a result, I'm going to record a driver fault for that. Now, the reason for this fault was the pupil looking in the right mirror for just a little bit too long as the silver van was coming up behind. It can be really easy to make these mistakes, so you want to be very attentive to them. Keep your mind up ahead, keep your mind focused on what you're doing, and that will help you reduce the chance of making these kind of mistakes. Up ahead, we've got two lanes merging in from the left-hand side, and whilst you do want to be checking your left mirror for vehicles coming up, what you don't want to be doing is swaying to the right as you're looking in that left mirror, and that's exactly what the pupil does here. As a result, I'm going to record another driver fault for positioning. Be very, very careful that you're not focusing too much on those mirrors, because that's exactly the problem they cause. You lose your focus on where you're pointing the car and you'll start swaying around, and that's more apparent at higher speeds like this. Just up ahead, we've got a service area on the left-hand side. When you're approaching exits like this, it's worth looking out for vehicles slowing down to take those exits, particularly ones like this where the slip roads are pretty short. It's also really important to look for the entry road. Notice how short this slip road is. We've got nothing using it at the moment, so not a problem, but just be mindful of your right-hand side and anything overtaking you, because you may need to use that space if something does pull out in front of you here. Up ahead, we're going to be taking the next exit towards Warwick. Now, we've already passed the direction sign which told us half a mile. We've then got these 3, 2, 1 countdown markers, and what we should be doing is signalling just as we pass that 3. Now, the pupil left the signal until we'd passed the 1, and that's why I'm going to record a driver fault for signal timing on this one. When you do take these exits, aim to keep your speed until you leave the main carriageway and are actually on the slip road, because then you reduce the chance of you disrupting anything going on that main road. Now, at this roundabout, I have asked the pupil to turn right third exit, and you can do that from the left lane on this one. However, she's going to go the wrong way. That in itself is not going to cause a problem. Now, earlier I mentioned not to dwell on mistakes that you make, because they can cause you to be distracted and make more mistakes, and that's exactly what this pupil does, unfortunately, because she's worried about having gone the wrong way, which would not actually be recorded as a fault. When we get to the traffic lights, she's too busy looking at the set on the right-hand side and fails to notice the filter arrow pointing to the left. She's prompted to move by the vehicle behind sounding its horn. That has to be a serious fault on this occasion. So even if you go the wrong way, keep in mind that that will not cost you your driving test. So the best thing to do is ignore it and move on, focusing forward on what you're doing next. As we make our way down this road, there are warnings for a set of traffic lights up ahead. However, the pupil does not seem to register these and keeps her speed up until the very last minute. As a result, the braking's a little uncomfortable. However, it's not enough risk to record as a serious fault, so I'm going to record a driver fault for that one. Because we took the wrong turn back at the roundabout, I'm going to use the car park on the left here to get the pupil to loop back onto the test route, back up to the roundabout where we were beforehand. If you do go into car parks, you just want to be mindful of vehicles pulling out of parking spaces, people moving around, and especially places like this. People are going to be carrying bags and cases with them as well. If you are rushing around a car park, you're going to run into problems very quickly. So the pupil's done a really nice job here, taking her time, just keeping her eyes moving throughout this as well, checking those mirrors frequently, and keeping herself nice and safe. As we come back to the traffic lights, we'll be taking a right turn, and it's really important to make sure your signals are on as you're approaching these lights, especially if there's cars coming from the opposite side. The pupil does not put her signals on until we're actually halfway into the junction, and whilst there's nobody around, it's still worth noting that she didn't signal until she's halfway in the junction. It's got to go down as a driver fault on this one. You want to make sure that your signals are on before you take the turns, not when you take the turns. Like I've said before, the whole point of the signal is tell people what you intend to do, not what you're already doing, because then the signal becomes pointless because they can already see what you're doing, and the signal doesn't really give people any extra information then. So signals show your intentions before you do them, not when you do them. At these traffic lights, we're going to take a right turn. Now, a couple of times in the past, I've had pupils who, as they're turning right, they see the lights on the right-hand side of the junction where the yellow post is. These lights do not apply to you. They apply to the silver car from the left, so be mindful not to stop there. And I say this because I don't just see learners doing this, I see experienced drivers still doing this, where they'll stop in the middle of a junction, a queue will start building up behind them that shouldn't have to stop, and everyone starts beeping the horns at them, getting annoyed at them, and they just sit there stubbornly staring at a red light that doesn't apply to them. And obviously that's just disruptive and it causes problems, so we don't want to be doing that. Making the way around this roundabout, the pupil's done a really nice job keeping in that left-hand lane, not swaying across the lines. She's keeping an eye on the right mirror as well as she's doing that, which of course is really important because as we leave that roundabout, we come across this junction, you can see the arrows telling us that the lanes merge together. So using that right mirror, again, you're just going to keep an eye on who's with you, and it helps you plan how to merge together safely. Remember, if you're prepared for those situations, then you're more calm about them. Whereas if you're not looking out for these things and people do overtake you and catch you off guard, it's just going to heighten your nerves, and that gives you a far greater chance of making mistakes on your test. At the traffic lights, we're taking a left turn, and if you notice, we've got a filter light saying left only here, and the pupil keeps the wheels turning, which is brilliant because it shows she's learned from the mistake that she made earlier. Unfortunately, it's a little too late because it's already been recorded as a serious fault. Now, when you do have left filter arrows like that, you might have noticed on both of those occasions the left lane was left only. So you can always look out for clues like this when you're coming into those traffic light junctions. If you end up stopped at traffic lights as well, just make sure you're looking around to ensure that you're looking at the correct set of traffic lights and identifying any filter lights, because they can be very easy to overlook. If you're looking over to the right, for example, like the pupil was earlier, you're going to miss a left filter light because typically they'll be on the left-hand side. And typically, if you're looking for a right turn filter arrow, it will be on the right-hand side of the set of lights. Coming around this next bend, we've then got the right turn back into the car park where we started. So that's going to bring our video to an end. And if you've been keeping count, we've got a total of 9 driver faults, 1 serious fault and no dangerous faults. And that serious fault would make this a fail, unfortunately. If you found this useful, please let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and I will try and keep these videos coming. Thank you again for watching, and God bless.